Halloween is pretty weird. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's tons of fun, dressing up in costumes, trick-or-treating, carving jack-o'-lanterns. I love Halloween. It's one of my favorite holidays. But what exactly is it? Why do we celebrate Halloween? Why do we dress up in costumes? Why do we carve faces into pumpkins? Where did all the black and orange and spooky stuff come from? Let's fix that. Hello, I'm Shayla Fontaine, and this is History Fix Kids, where I tell surprising true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. Today, we're talking about the history of Halloween, something not many people actually know about. I hope you guys like my Halloween decorations. Grown-ups, remember, there are lesson materials that go along with this episode, and you can access those at the link in the description. Halloween is pretty confusing and weird holiday because it's actually very, very old. Its history goes back to around 2,000 years ago. Over the last 2,000 years, quite a few different holidays from all over the world blended together into the Halloween that we know today. It's almost like a Frankenstein of different holidays, little pieces from each all put together to make this new, weird, spooky thing. Halloween really got its start 2,000 years ago with an ancient group of people called the Celts. The Celts lived mostly in what is now Ireland, the UK, and northern France. And they celebrated a holiday on October 31st called Samhain. I know it doesn't look like it says Samhain, but that's how you spell it. The Celts celebrated a lot of different holidays throughout the year. Most of their holidays had to do with the changing of the seasons, and Samhain was definitely one of those. Today, our new year begins on January 1st, but back then, in the ancient Celtic world, the first day of the new year was November 1st. So October 31st, Samhain, was kind of like a New Year's Eve for them, but it was more than that. October 31st is also the time of year that summer starts to change into winter. The days become shorter, the weather turns cold, the grass turns brown, the trees lose their leaves, the flowers die. This was a time of year, and it still is, associated with death. That's just what fall is, really. It's the time of year things die. The plants and animals come back in the spring, don't worry, but by October 31st, the plants are beginning to die off for the winter, and the animals are disappearing to hide out in their burrows. Because of these seasonal changes happening this time of year, Samhain became a celebration of death for the Celts. They believed that on the night of October 31st, the boundary between the worlds of the living and of the dead became thinner, and that their ancestors who had passed away could even come back and visit them. But for most people, this wasn't scary or a bad thing. They wanted to be with their family again. They missed their loved ones who had died. Samhain was a chance to connect with the spirits of those loved ones once again. Does this remind you of another holiday? It reminds me of another one called Day of the Dead, or Dia de Muertos. Day of the Dead comes from Mexico, and it's very similar to Samhain. On both holidays, Day of the Dead and Samhain, Mexican people and Celtic people believe that the spirits of ancestors can come back to visit the living. On both days, they leave out food and offerings for their loved ones who have passed away. But you want to know something kind of crazy? Day of the Dead didn't come from the Celts, like Samhain. It came from the Aztec people who lived in Mexico. The Aztecs were also very in tune with nature, just like the Celts. They noticed the changing of the seasons too. They noticed how everything seemed to die in the fall, and so they had a very similar holiday. These two holidays come from totally different parts of the world, from two different groups of people, the Aztecs and the Celts, who had never even met each other. Pretty crazy. But there is a link that connects them. You'll find out about that soon. For now, let's go back to the ancient Celts over in Europe, because that's where Halloween was really born. To celebrate Samhain, the Celts put out the fires in their fireplaces. This isn't something you would normally do back then. It's actually pretty hard to get a fire started, and they didn't have heat in their houses or anything like that, so they really needed their fires. They mostly kept their fires burning all the time, even if it was just a little ember, a tiny little piece of burning wood. But on Samhain, they put their fires totally out, even the ember. Then, they all came together and had a huge bonfire party. At the end of the party, everyone took an ember home from the bonfire to light their own fires again. This new fire represented a fresh start in the new year, and they believed that it would protect them throughout the coming winter months. People who celebrated Samhain also left offerings of food and drinks outside their houses for the spirits of the dead. Because remember, they believed that these spirits could visit the world of the living on this day. They also did something very Halloween-like because of the spirits. They dressed in costumes. If people had to be out and about in the streets on Samhain, they wore scary costumes so that the spirits would leave them alone. The idea was that if they ran into one of these ghosts while they were out, it would mistake them for another ghost and leave them alone. So that's likely where the scary Halloween costumes came from. But Samhain is not Halloween yet. It's still a different holiday. A few things had to happen for it to transform into the Halloween we know today. By the year 43, the Roman Empire from farther south had moved its way up and taken over most of the Celtic territory. The Romans would rule over this land for around the next 400 years, and they brought a lot of their own traditions and holidays with them when they moved into England and Ireland and the other places where Celtic people lived. They had a couple fall holidays too that happened around the same time as Samhain. One of these Roman holidays was called Feralia. It was the day when the Romans honored the passing of the dead, kind of like Samhain. They also had another fall holiday or festival day to honor the goddess Pomona. Pomona was the Roman goddess of fruit and trees, and her symbol was the apple. This might be how apples became associated with fall. Have you ever been bobbing for apples? That's when you stick your head into a big bucket of water full of apples and try to grab one with your mouth. Yeah. It's a pretty weird game, but it's something people do in the fall around Halloween time. And that is very likely because of the Roman goddess Pomona. The Roman Empire didn't last forever. It collapsed in the year 476. But by that time, the old Roman religion was gone and it had been replaced with Christianity. It took a few more hundred years for Christianity to reach up into the Celtic lands in Ireland and England and France, but when it did, it brought more new holidays with it. Christians had a holiday called All Saints' Day that was celebrated on November 1st. In the year 1000, they added another one called All Souls' Day that was celebrated on November 2nd. All Souls' Day was the Christian holiday to honor the dead. It's very likely that the Christians added this new holiday to replace Samhain. They didn't want the Celts to celebrate their old holidays anymore. They just wanted them to celebrate Christian holidays now. So there's All Souls' Day on November 2nd and All Saints' Day on November 1st. All Saints' Day was also called All Hallows or All Hallowmas, which means All Saints' Day in Middle English, an older version of English. You know how we have Christmas Eve and then Christmas, or New Year's Eve and then New Year's? Well, soon the day before All Saints' Day or All Hallowmas came to be called All Hallows Eve, and eventually Halloween. Our Halloween that we celebrate today is really a mix of the Celtic holiday Samhain, the Roman holidays of Feralia and Pomona, and the Christian All Hallows Eve. If you think about it, even the word Halloween is sort of a mix of All Hallows Eve and Samhain. Hallow, Samhain, Halloween. Later, Christians would make their way to Mexico too, where All Hallows Eve blended with Aztec celebrations to create Day of the Dead. It's similar, but not exactly the same, and that's because of the Aztec touch. But how did Halloween make its way from Europe to the United States? When English colonists first came to what is now the United States, they didn't celebrate Halloween. All Hallows Eve was a Catholic holiday. And the early colonists were Protestants. They were still Christians, but it's like a different type of Christian. So they weren't really into Halloween. Later on, other groups of people started to immigrate to the United States, people from Ireland and Italy, which are mostly Catholic countries. They brought Halloween celebrations with them. But it wasn't really like it is today. They might wear spooky costumes and tell ghost stories, but a lot of the traditions were still missing. By the early 1900s, newspapers and community leaders started encouraging parents to take anything scary out of Halloween. It's not about spirits anymore. Now it's just about dressing up in silly costumes and having fun. And at this point, it changed from a religious holiday into a secular holiday. Secular means not religious. By the 1920s and 1930s, people, mostly teenagers, had started to use Halloween as an excuse to cause trouble. They would go out and throw toilet paper and eggs at people's houses. Sometimes they would cause even more damage. They called this mischief making. The parents needed ways to distract these kids so they wouldn't cause so much trouble. They came up with Halloween activities like haunted houses, hay rides, and even trick-or-treating. While trick-or-treating didn't become a thing until the mid-1900s in the US, it actually goes way back. We think modern-day trick-or-treating is based on the All Souls Day parades they used to have in England hundreds of years ago. During the festivities, poor people would go knocking door to door and families would give them food called soul cakes. It was like a trade. They got to eat the soul cakes, and in return, they promised to pray for the souls of the family's loved ones who had passed away. This was called going a souling. Eventually, children joined in, going door to door to get food and even money in exchange for promising to pray. Over the centuries, the soul cakes turned into candy. Going a souling became trick-or-treating, and it's mostly just children who do it now. But what about the pumpkins? How did pumpkins become associated with Halloween? Pumpkins don't grow in Europe naturally. They come from North America. So the Celts, the Romans, the early Christians, they didn't even know about pumpkins. Not until Europeans moved to America. Because pumpkins are harvested in the fall, they're an important part of Native American fall harvest celebrations. Once Halloween made its way to the Americas, it got a touch of Native American culture added to it. Remember, it was already a mix of Celtic, Roman, and Christian. Now, with the addition of pumpkins, it was a little bit Native American too. But why do we carve faces into pumpkins? Where did jack-o'-lanterns come from? This tradition came from Ireland. Remember, they didn't have pumpkins in Ireland at first. Instead, the Irish carved turnips, not pumpkins. But why? Well, it's based on a legend about a guy named Stingy Jack. According to the legend, Jack trapped the devil and then, before letting him go, made him promise that he wouldn't send him to the underworld when he died. So when Jack died, he didn't go to the underworld, but he also couldn't get into heaven. So he was forced to wander Earth as a ghost for all eternity. The devil gave Jack a carved out turnip with a burning lump of coal in it to light his way as he wandered around. So eventually, based on this legend, people started hollowing out turnips, carving scary faces into them, and lighting them up to scare away evil spirits. Eventually, when this tradition made its way to America, the turnip was swapped out for a pumpkin. So the Jack in jack-o'-lantern comes from Stingy Jack. What about black and orange? Why are those the Halloween colors? That comes straight from Samhain. Black represented the death of summer, and orange symbolized the fall harvest season. You know how leaves turn orange in the fall. Pumpkins happen to be orange too, but that's not why orange was one of the colors of Samhain. Remember, the ancient Celts had never even seen pumpkins before. That's just a coincidence. So there you have it. Halloween, a beautiful mix of ancient Celtic ritual, Roman festival days, Catholic holy days, and indigenous American harvest traditions. Some people don't like Halloween because it seems dark and scary and even evil. But really, Halloween was always a celebration. It was a celebration of the end of life, the passing of the seasons, the withering of the plants. It's something to be respected and honored, and yeah, maybe it is a little creepy. Death is a little creepy, but it's an important part of the circle of life. Just as fall is an important part of the circle of the seasons. We are born and we live and grow and learn and love, and then we die. It's just as important as every other part of the cycle. So why not give it its own holiday? Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix Kids. I hope you found this story interesting and maybe you even learned something new. Grown-ups, remember, you can access those lesson materials at the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about the show. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix.